G'day. Welcome to part 2 of our discussion with Father Rod Bauer. Today we'll be looking at his priesthood within the Anglican Church. Being at Gosford, you were at Gosford for a long time.
22 years in Gosford.
So how did you come to Gosford and take over that role at Cross Church?
I was the parish priest in Toukley for 3 years, and it was my first parish, and I was quite an ambitious young priest at that point, and so Gosford became vacant, and I thought, well, that's another step up the ladder. So I applied for it, and I got married at the same time as this. So I got married 1 week, had a week's honeymoon, and then came to Gosford the next week. So there was a lot going on at that point, and I saw it at that point, to be honest, as a good career move, because I was still in that mode.
In that mind, yeah.
It turned out not to be the case, but that's another story.
So some people will really know you from your signs.
Yes.
How did that come about? Like going from just being a small parish to having such a strong social position in the community?
Well, we got this. A lot of churches at that time were getting these changeable signs, and so we thought that'd be a good idea to sort of advertise what we were doing. And I'd been asked to go and give the last rites to a man who was dying, and this guy was gay, and his family were clearly uncomfortable with me being there, and I totally understand why, because of what the church has, the position that the church has traditionally taken in the area of human sexuality. And I was deeply moved by their discomfort, and I thought, I've really got to do something about this. I've got to get that message out there that not all churches are anti-gay. I'm certainly not, and there's a lot of welcoming and affirming churches around. Yeah. And so I went back. I just put up that sign, "Dear Christians, some people are gay. Get over it. Love God." And I stuck it up on the parish Facebook page, which had about 140 likes or something, because most churches have 140, 150 likes on their Facebook, because it's a few parishioners and a few people who feel sorry for you and so forth. So, And then a few days later there was 1,000, then a couple of days later there was 3,000, and it went viral, and the press started ringing, and my wife was visiting our kids over in Western Australia at the time, and I rang her and I said, "Look, I think I've done something really silly." Because I had no way of coping with the media attention. We had no media training or anything. It was just coming at me, and I was not handling it well, so I took a bit of advice, and it kept coming, and I realised fairly quickly that social media was a platform that we could use creatively and successfully. Yeah. And in an age of memes, I didn't even know what a meme was then, but in an age of memes, that simple 52-letter sign was a classic meme. Yeah. And because it came out of a place that was surprising and unexpected for people. Here was a church sign that was starting to say some things that in most people's minds seem radical for a church to be saying. I actually don't think they were. I think that's our core business, to be honest. The things we should be saying. But for the hearers, it was radical. And I actually think that's probably the same dynamic that we found 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem, because he was saying, the founder of the firm was saying things that really weren't that radical. They were core business. But for the hearers,
it was different to what they were used to.
It was totally different, yeah.
What is your favourite sign? What was your all-time favourite sign?
That's probably... There was another one after one of the school shootings in the States. I put up women they love their kids more than their guns. and it went super viral.
I'm guessing Americans would have picked that up.
Yeah, I got a lot of hate mail and death threats about it, but one of the rappers, Jay-Z, or one of those guys, I forget who it was, but he picked it up and put it in one of his lyrics of his song at the time, and it just went...
Wow.
It went, never paid me any money. But so I think that's I'm not sure I have a real favourite. I mean, there were, I think, lots around refugees, the nation that stops a race around Melbourne Cup. On Melbourne Cup Day was another one that was it was the most viewed image on the internet that Melbourne Cup Day.
Wow.
It was the day that Gay Waterhouse won the cup. And it got more views than Gay Waterhouse holding the cup.
That's when you know you're really cutting through.
Yeah. There's been so many of them, but it's just been such and I quite miss it not having it now because I've moved on, but it was such a way to communicate with clarity into a communication vacuum in many ways.
Yeah.
So
that's a great segue. Where are you now? You've moved on. What's next?
So I'm now the Director of Mission in the Diocese of Newcastle, Newcastle Anglican. And it seemed like it was time to this position came up. There were parts of it that really excited me in terms of the formation of clergy. And I was getting to that age, turning 60, where 100 hours a week was probably just getting a bit too much for me. Okay. And so there was aspects of this new ministry that were really exciting for me. So I'm involved with the formation of the new clergy, and I'm quite passionate about that because I
bringing them in and training them?
Yes, they get brought in by another system, and then they do their academic training, and then they come into formation for 2 years. Okay. So I have 2 years to really help them come to an understanding of what priesthood is, and that's really exciting for me. I also have to look at, we have 2,500 employees in Newcastle Anglican, in schools, aged care and disability services and parishes and so forth. And so part of my job is to look at the spirituality of those organisations. And because I'm really interested in the deep parts of what spirituality is, that's quite an exciting.
So some people may think that you're assigned to are sometimes controversial, that maybe you've been sidelined and moved out.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
I have heard that. Well, it's not true. I mean, I could have stayed in Gosford until the day I died, really. And there was something attractive about that as well. But I felt I had one last challenge. So I made this choice. I chose to do this. Okay. There was no coercion whatsoever. The bishop made the offer, and I could have. And he often says, no is a perfectly acceptable answer to this. Yeah. And but I said yes.
So a lot of people which do get a bit of celebrity, I'm guessing that's what the signs were, a bit of celebrity, sometimes struggle stepping back from that limelight, and they're losing their voice almost.
Yes.
How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's been a struggle, to be honest. Bono says that celebrity is currency. You've got to spend it wisely. So I am a particularly ego-driven psyche, I'd have to say. Now, that's not always it can be a bad thing, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. And so to move back from some of that stuff, I have really missed it. Yeah, I've missed the currency. Yeah. And I hope I spent it wisely for other people's benefit. And there's a sense in which there are moments when I feel I'm broke in that sense of currency, because I see something happening and I think, I would like to spend some of my currency in that space to help you know, to highlight that issue or to help move public opinion slightly, you know. I don't have that anymore, and I do miss. Honestly, I do miss that. But then I get to spend some time with somebody who's on that ever deepening spiritual journey, consoled, I think, by the hope that, you know, maybe one day this person will make a difference in some people's lives.
So instead of being that person at the front, you're now trying to encourage others to take that leadership role.
Yes, and so that's the purpose of what I'm doing in our organisation, is enabling people to flourish themselves so that they might enable others to flourish. So it's just not me doing it anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's helping other people to do it as well. Yeah.
So I know some of your parishioners up at the church have been holding a vigil, and you've strongly encouraged them to hold that vigil about refugees.
Yes,
Is that sort of an example?
Yeah, so we a couple of years ago now, every Monday afternoon at West Gosford, there's up to a dozen people who just keep the refugee issue at the forefront of people's psyches. It has sort of got off the agenda a little bit, and things are getting better for some refugees.
We still have people out in the Pacific Islands.
But there are still people on Manus and Nauru. It's only recently that the Billawheeler family have been able to go home. And I think it's an issue that the minute we forget the extraordinary harm that was done to the world's most vulnerable people is the minute that we are in danger of repeating that. So these wonderful people get out there with their signs on a Monday afternoon and wave them, and they get a lot of affirmation, people tooting, and occasionally they get people who don't agree with them. Since I've left Gosford, the community has been part of a group that have received a refugee family and helped them find their way into Australian society and so forth. So I'm just so grateful that those little things that we started some years ago have grown, and they're continuing to flourish.
So that family, while there's no good and bad refugees, are from Ukraine, I believe.
I think this family is Syrian.
Syrian?
I think, yes.
To live through what they've gone through in Syria would be...
Yes. It's been horrific. And there are some other churches I know. I was with a church last weekend who are working on a family coming from Afghanistan. Of course, with the Taliban taking over in Afghanistan, women's rights are being taken away.
Removed again.
And, you know, so there's still a huge amount of need there. And we do need immigrants.
Yes.
Our economy needs. Our economy will start to. Part of that is that we haven't had immigrants for a number of years. Now that was partly some government policy. COVID really knocked that around, and so a lot of our regional industry is struggling at the moment because we cannot get people to work in some regional areas. So it's important for our economy, but it's more than that. It's important for our national soul to be a welcoming and affirming.
I've heard many stories about country towns when a refugee family comes in. It just adding so much to that country town. Yes. They bring children to keep the schools going. They want to participate. They want to work hard. So yeah, in the regions, I think it's a really, really important part is to bring in the refugees and the immigration because it's something which is important to all regional people.
And it enlivens the psyche of the community too. It brings diversity. And you know, country people are often seen. I mean, I'm a country person. I grew up. Often seen as quite conservative, and they are in many ways. But in this particular way, they're incredibly open and welcoming and interested in diversity. And
I've always found that when you go to a country town, people just want to say hello and they want you there.
Yep.
So earlier you were talking about Kerry, your wife.
Yep.
How do you meet?
We met at the crematorium.
A crematorium? Yeah, there has to be a story there.
You know, across a smoke-filled room. Kerry was a funeral director. so that's where we met. And I remember her. I was taking a funeral, and I know the funeral liturgy off by heart. I don't really need a book because I've done thousands of funerals. And she walked past. There's a glass wall at the back of the chapel, and she walked past, and I lost my place in the funeral.
It's always a good sign.
And I thought, oh, that's a bit weird. And so anyway, we started to form a relationship, and eventually got married, and came to Gosford, as I said, the next week. Yes, and that was a really, because we formed a family with Kerry's two teenage, well now no longer teenage children, but at that point. So,
yeah.
And two teenage kids coming into a fishbowl existence, that was really hard for them because they lived quite a private life. Yeah. But we managed it. I think we managed it really well, to be honest, and we flourished together as a family and continue, and now we have grandchildren, and yeah.
So it's something we all struggle with in this day and age of work-life balance. How does work-life balance work for a parish priest which is doing 100 hours with a family and
It
wife?
Doesn't.
It doesn't?
No, it doesn't. I was particularly bad, I'd have to say, at this. And I remember, one night, Kerry telling me that I'd been out 26 nights in a row. And especially when you're newly married, you're still trying to form a relationship with everybody. And so I did that very badly, I'd have to say. And I'm much better at it these. And part of my new role, it means that I'm able to be better at that now. But one of the things I talk to the training clergy about is trying to help them not make the same mistakes I made in terms of family. I think we are better at it these days, and I think the church as an organisation is better at permission giving and helping people keep that balance. Because when you don't keep that balance, you get quite unhealthy.
Okay.
And we don't want unhealthy clergy.
Yeah.
We
want them good members of society.
We want healthy clergy in healthy families.
Physically and mentally.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So with that in light, how do you feel that some of the other denominations and faiths handling of marriage and things sort of works in celibacy? Would you prefer to have the family and work hard at that, or maybe the celibacy may work?
Well, I think celibacy works for those who are genuinely called to that. People who are genuinely have a vocation to the single life, that works for them. Yeah. Especially if there's a supportive community around. I think the problem rises when, people in some churches that have celibacy as a requirement, if someone feels called to priestly ministry but not called to celibacy, they've got to make a choice.
Yeah.
And that can sometimes lead to an unhealthy psyche. And in the Anglican Church we have celibate clergy, but they're celibate because they genuinely feel that's a vocational calling for them. Yeah.
So in 2023, you have experience with people which are coming into the clergy.
Yes.
In 2023, what does a calling to the priesthood sound like and whatnot? How do people know that they're hearing that calling?
It's incredibly diverse, far more diverse than it was 35 years ago when I started exploring this. At that point, only men could be priests in the Anglican Church. Yeah. And I was around the time when we were starting to explore what priesthood would be if women could be priests. Yeah. And eventually I was actually ordained to the priesthood with the first group of women in Newcastle. Okay. And so that was a time of great excitement and anxiety, and it was something new and different. So I think that has dramatically changed the way we understand vocation and the way we understand how people can find. I mean, I think of vocation in terms of, you know, there's a U-shaped hole in the universe, and your vocation is to fill that space, and whether that be priesthood or whatever, teaching or
doctor, nurse,
plumber, whatever. I think, you know, when we fill that space, we flourish. We become more whole as human beings, and so the path to that for the priesthood is much more diverse now than it was. You know, women are involved. Our church is grappling with the issue of human sexuality, and trying to work out how that works if we have a same-sex partnered person who feels called to the priesthood. Now, we haven't found any easy answers to that yet, but it's an ongoing conversation for us.
And how does that conversation happen inside the Anglican Church?
In very difficult ways, I'd have to say.
I'm sure in all churches it's very difficult.
I mean, there is a real tension in the Anglican communion around this issue, and it does threaten, in some ways, to split the communion. But where it happens best, it happens on the foundation of the acknowledgement that every human being is created in God's image, is a child of God, and is of equal value and dignity. If the conversation doesn't start from that place, people are harmed.
Yeah.
And so we always try and bring it back to that space. Okay, everyone is a child of God. Everyone is of equal value and dignity. And we go from that place and say, okay, so how can this diversity be celebrated in a space that doesn't always find diversity easy?
So you were talking about earlier that the Anglican Church has found diversity in the ministry of the priesthood.
Yes.
Do you see that one day that would also happen within the congregation, where that diversity is encouraged and they see the benefit of that diversity?
I think in many congregations it is. I know my old congregation here in Gosford, you know, the Anglican Church by nature in Australia is pretty white, English, and that's just by nature of immigration. The Anglican Church throughout the world is incredibly diverse. The biggest Anglican churches are in Africa. There are more Anglicans in church on a Sunday in Kenya than there are people in Australia.
Wow, that is a big number.
You know, something like 30 million.
Yeah.
And if you look at the class photo of the Lambeth bishops, which is every 10 years, all the bishops in the Anglican Communion meet, or most of them. And if you look back, you know, 50 or 60 years, they're all, you know, pretty white.
Yep.
There are more African faces in that class photo now than there are faces like mine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are incredibly diverse, but that brings with it tensions, of course, because, you know, people bring a lot of their own cultural backgrounds, and in more conservative cultures like some of the African cultures, the issue of human sexuality is approached in a very different way.
Thank you very much for listening to us today. That was part 2 of our discussion with Father Rod Bauer. Please follow us for part 3, where we discuss the voice to Parliament.